Mr. Chairman, as you know, is the only independent on the committee. My views are a little bit different than some of my colleagues. Let me start off by saying, as Secretary Benson has already indicated, that in the past 4 years, the RTC has spent, with the approval of Congress, some $87 billion, and today the request is for another $45 billion, equaling about $132 billion. Now, what I don't understand, and probably the crux of what I'm going to be saying right now, is that, as you know, Secretary Benson, there is enormous concern about a $4 trillion national debt and a $300 billion deficit. You can't go to a meeting here in Congress or watch television without that concern being surfaced. I find it, therefore, extraordinarily amazing that a request for another $45 billion is being brought forth, and that is, for some of us, a lot of money, and there is virtually no discussion that I have heard about how we might come up with that $45 billion other than dumping it into the deficit. Now, to me, there is something a little bit wrong when we hear a lot of criticism of the President's $31 billion stimulus package, which I support. I would put more money into job creation, education, the needs of our kids. They've been starved. And people say we can't afford that $31 billion for the children to rebuild our infrastructure, to create jobs. Too much money. And yet today, we're talking about $45 billion to be simply dumped into the deficit. Now, obviously, I agree with Secretary Benson that this is a sum of money, that the depositors must be compensated. The faith and credit of the United States is at stake, and nobody, I think, would suggest that that money not be forthcoming. But I think the $64 question is, how do you raise that $45 billion? The chart that I have distributed says what I think most people know, is that over the last few years, the wealthiest people, in fact, have made out like bandits, and most other people have seen a decline in their standard of living. The chart comes from a study done by Kennicle and Woodburn. Mr. Arthur Kennicle is with the Federal Reserve. He's an economist there, and Louise Woodburn is with the IRS. And what do they tell us? What they tell us is that between a 6-year period, 83 and 89, the wealthiest 0.5% saw an increase in the percentage of wealth that they hold in this country from 24% to close to 29%. Other studies indicate that of the $2.6 trillion increase in family wealth between 83 and 89, 55% of that increase of wealth went to the top richest 0.5% of the people in this country, while the poorest people in the bottom 2 quintiles lost $256 billion. Now, I say all that to suggest that maybe it is not fair. Maybe one of the reasons that the American people get disgusted with what goes on in Washington is that they perceive, perhaps correctly, that the Congress and the White House are not representing the needs of ordinary people, but more the interest of the wealthy people. So let me repeat, I happen to believe that we do have to come up with that money, and that the depositors, in order to protect the faith and credit of this country, must be compensated. My concern is that we must come up with a progressive and fair mechanism to raise that $45 billion and not simply dump it into the deficit and ask working people and poor people and family farmers who are going out of business and senior citizens who have seen cutbacks in Medicare. I don't think that those people should be asked to pay for this bailout. So what my question is we have introduced legislation.
Time of the gentleman has expired.